what product managers, Scrum Masters and software developers want each other to know. So instead of talking about it, we're going to do a mock workshop between the three of us to discuss this and plan it out. And I'll hand over to John to explain the context for the workshop.
Thanks, Rudolf. So as Rudolf mentioned a little bit earlier, is what we discovered some months ago when we were thinking about a topic that might be of interest is how different the worlds of product managers, Scrum Masters and developers are from each other. That they often live in their own worlds and they don't understand things from the other side. So we thought it would be of interest to have an event that could look at bridging that gap, to say what does each of them need to know about the other. And as Rudolf said, the format of this is in terms of a team agreement. Now we're not going to be looking at this for, obviously when you do have a team agreement, which is normally part of your mobilization phase of projects, is to look at saying how do teams, what sort of, when do you need your meetings, specifically which stakeholders are you engaged with, what are your lines of communication, looking at things like situational empathy and all that sort of thing. Now we're not going to go into the mechanics of that because the purpose of tonight is really looking at the bridging between those three areas. So we're going to be tackling it from a more holistic, philosophical perspective, rather than, as the team agreement would, is nail down those specifics. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at those specific topics that Rudolf has got up on the screen there. So we're going through 6 topics this evening. And for each of those topics, we've nominated one of the three of us as a topic owner. And what the owner will do is introduce the topic and talk about what that particular role is requiring from the other 2 roles. And then we'll open it for broader discussion amongst the three of us. And then also, I think Rudolf might mention earlier about the questions, also a bit later about the questions, and you can use that QR code to log your questions for talking about at the end. The roles are fairly generic in the sense that we couldn't have all of the roles that you would have on a project here. So what we're doing is we've grouped them into specific categories and they're represented by us. So for example, Rudolf is representing the product owners, the product managers, even the product directors, the product team, and that could include the SMEs and all the roles that are in that area. And Rich is looking at the development team. So within the context of Scrum, the development team includes your developers, your testers, your analysts, your sort of BAs, and coders, and all the people that are involved in actually producing the thing that you're doing. And then from a Scrum Master point of view is also looking at your Agile coach and to a certain extent also the project management side. So those are really the 3 groupings that we're considering in this. Now there are many ways of implementing agility or having responsive organizations, and we can't, in the context of our discussion today, we can't cover all of those. So what we're doing is we're using Scrum as the context for this discussion. And that's not to say that Scrum is the best approach to use in all cases, but it's the one that's perhaps the most popular when you're implementing things in an agile way. So, Rich, what are your thoughts?
I can't wait to get started. Well, I realized that when you mentioned about the Lego session, that's obviously something really fun to attend as well. So, obviously there are many topics for the discussion. We've selected a few topics that we think could fit for tonight, and we've decided to put 8 minutes against each topic. After that, we'll have 15 minutes of Q&A, followed by a bit of social networking till 8 p.m. So let's get started with that, and with that I'll hand over back to Roloff.
Right, so let's get into it. Our first topic, what product managers need to why product managers need to share the vision with the team, and what does that mean? So some of the most common challenges in product development are different goals across teams and different goals amongst individuals within a team. Second one is poor communications, and the third one is a lack of decision making or slow decision making. Now we know that at the root of all these things, the people, individuals, teams are not on the same page. In other words, there's no shared vision between everyone. So because of this, sharing the vision is one of the most important tasks that a product manager needs to do. It's about making sure that everybody's on the same page and that it is well defined and well understood and that everybody is buying in on that thing. Maybe we should also explain what is the product vision. So when we apply it to stories or epics in the backlog or a sprint goal or a product or a feature, it is a simple message that tells us who the target group is, in other words, customers and users. It describes a problem that we are going to try to solve with this new feature. It lists the goals and the differentiators of our solution, and it says why it is valuable to both the customer and the business. What it is not, it's not a how to do it. Product managers should not be telling developers how to do their job. We tell them what it is and why it is. So, what do we want to know? What do we want developers to know from this? A good product manager will never stop talking about the product vision. It binds us together towards a common goal, ensure alignment in our communications, and guides the decisions we need to make. I think the Scrum Master might have a few thoughts about this.
Absolutely, absolutely. From a Scrum Master's point of view, you're really interested in two things. You're interested in the hygiene of the process, and you're interested in team motivation as far as the vision is concerned. So if you know what it is that you're trying to achieve with the thing, you need to say from a hygiene point of view is how do we know when we got there? What is the definition of done of that thing? And if you need to have a particular increment or you need to have a particular piece of work done, how do you know when that part is done? So that's where the vision becomes really important. Not just the vision for the whole piece, but also the vision for the next increment and the vision for the individual story. And it's important that that is specified as in terms of the outcome as opposed to, as we were saying, the journey to get there. Not that we need you to do the following things, we need you to achieve the following objective. Now the reason for that is because that allows the team members to be motivated. So I don't know if any of you have read the book Drive by Dan Pink, which talks about motivation of the team as being focused on autonomy, mastery and purpose. So as far as that's concerned, if you understand what that vision is, then it fits in with the purpose part of that. It says that you understand how the work that you're doing is contributing towards the greater whole, and you feel that you're contributing to something that's bigger than yourself. And that feeds into team motivation. It gets people excited to go to work in the morning. The other important thing from a Scrum Master point of view is to be able to contextualize the impediments. So a Scrum Master, an important part of their role is to be able to, when the development team experiences things that stop them from being able to achieve what they need to, they raise that up to the Scrum Master and say, this is an impediment that's stopping us. And the Scrum Master's role is to facilitate the resolution of that. And if you understand the vision, you understand whether a particular impediment is an important thing to resolve and put a lot of effort into, or deprioritize it because it's not that important, focus on things which are perhaps more important. So that's why it's important for the Scrum Master to be aware of the vision, and that's why they need it from the product owner. Rich.
Yes, thanks, John. So, vision's important for the dev team, and here's why. As a dev manager, when I hire a new team member, I look for someone who is enthusiastic and creative. As a developer, I want to understand and believe in the vision because I want to be excited about the product that I want to build. And the whole reason for that is you need energy to build a product. You need positive energy. Positive energy to happen, you need to understand and believe in the vision and be excited about it. Dev teams aren't just technical people, we are creatives as well, and we need to understand what the vision is so that we can express our creativity in order to help you build what you want. And that's all I have to say for that.
Great, thanks Rich. So Rul, if you wanted to say anything further?
No, let's go on to the next one.
Excellent. So definition of done, completed for the first. The next one is the division of responsibilities. So I've owned that topic as a Scrum Master because essentially the Scrum Master is responsible for facilitating the process. And part of that is understanding the roles of the individuals involved. So the role of there's a bit of a church and state separation, and this is by design. So traditionally you'd have one person who would be the project manager, for example, that will control exactly what it is that you're producing as well as how you do it, and you end up with individuals coming to that project manager or team leader to say, what do I do today? They get a parcel of work and they go and do that work, and then they bring it back and say, what's my next piece of work? And that becomes that decomposition of the schedule and activities. So the Agile process turns that a little bit on its head when you look at the relationship between product managers and developers to say that you separate those two out. And the reason for that comes back to that Dan Pink philosophy around motivation, is that if you tell people what they need to achieve but not how to do it, and they have all of the creativity within the team, and especially if it's a cross-functional team, they can have all sorts of backgrounds in applying things in different ways. They get together and they say, how are we going to solve this problem? It means that they own the how and the when, because they also understand how much work is involved in getting there. So the product manager, we've got the what's and the why, we've got as Rudolf mentioned earlier, the vision, defining the backlog to say this is the work that's coming up that you need to be doing, and then broken down into the individual stories that need to be done. So that's the granular sort of outcomes that one needs to achieve, and then also prioritizing those. Also being available to resolve issues as they come up. So for example, if the team says, well, there could be multiple ways of doing this, what outcome would you prefer? Being available to work through that with the team when they come up with that. And then also at the end, accepting that increment. So that when the team proudly presents what they've produced and said, hey, we've really worked hard on this is it, then the product manager can say, yep, that's exactly what I had in mind. Alternatively, no, look, we've kind of missed the mark a little bit, but don't worry, we'll work something in to fix it in the next iteration. From the developer's point of view, as I mentioned, that they are focused on the how and the when. So what do we need to do in order to achieve that objective, and how long is it going to take to get there? Working with the product manager to groom the backlog. So for example, there could be dependencies related in there to say, hey, you've got to do this one first before the other one, because there's a dependency that connects the two together. And then of course to deliver the actual solution and then showcase it at the end. Now the Scrum Master owns and facilitates that process, holds the teams to their commitments, not to parcel out work to individual people, but to hold them to the commitments that they've made through those processes. Make sure that they have, that the ceremonies are robust, that they take place when they need to, that the collaboration is supported by the structure, and that management is able to understand what the health of the project is. Because you have executives that are very time poor. You need that conduit up to them to say, yes, this is a green project and it really is green. It's not a watermelon with green on the outside and red on the inside. Being able to work with the team to get those metrics together, resolve the impediments, and then also to protect the developers from the product manager. So if the product manager comes in and says, hey, I really need this thing, and then the Scrum Master can go and say, oh, hang on a sec, don't put that thing into the Scrum now, because it's going to really disrupt the team and you're going to have a lot of switching cost. And then if it's really important to go in, then the product manager accepts the ownership of the disruption that causes the team, but it means that conversation has taken place. So Rudolf, what are your thoughts?
Right, I'm going to start by answering that last one about protecting people from us. Yeah, that's right. But product managers, that should never be necessary. We should be aware of this process. We shouldn't expect the developers to change tack during the sprint. There's two other things that I want to add. Two other things that product managers are responsible for in the product development team. The first one is product managers represent the business. This means we need to ensure that business goals are met in the product. So examples of these business goals that I'm talking about, increasing revenue, increasing retention, penetrating a new market or segment, there's dozens of those. But the point is, product managers want developers to know that all products, all features are or should be anchored in some or other business goal. If it's not, why are we doing it? The second one, product manager's role includes being the voice of the customer. We talk with the customers, we listen to what they're saying, we hear their needs, and we get their feedback. So we want to ensure that we meet the customer's needs. When we come to the table with some kind of feedback, we just want you guys to know that we're not sucking these things out of thin air. This is actual feedback that we get from customers, and it's something that we should be considering in what we do next. Now, of course, that doesn't mean we're just going to start changing the plan with every bit of feedback that we're getting. But if the feedback is consistent, then we need to look at it and act accordingly. I would love to know what the developers think of this, Rich.
Thanks, Roloff. Before I get started, how many of you here work in a startup environment or a small team? And how many of you have worn more than one hat in your role? Awesome, because that's what responsibility and division responsibility is. When I first wrote this piece of paper here, I thought about writing high quality requirements as one of the key criteria, but it really isn't, especially when you hold multiple roles. The key to responsibility and division of it is communications, is to understanding what are the roles that you wear and communicating from those roles, right? So if you're someone who's working as, say, a manager and a developer, there are times that you need to communicate as the manager, and there are times you need to communicate as the developer. And there may be times that you hold a product ownership role and you need to speak from that role as well. And to me, that's really important in order to help your fellow teammates in the various respective responsibilities understand what they have to do. Often than not, we mix up these roles because we're so busy and we won't want one hat, and things get messed up because you're trying to write code and then you're trying to test at the same time. Well, do I let this piece of code pass because I'm testing it and I'm under pressure? Or do I play the bad cop and fail my own code because as a QA person, this doesn't pass the criteria? How about the PO? What does the product owner think about this product? Is it fit for market? So all of these things require communications. Sometimes you need to work with your teammates. Sometimes you need to reach out to your customers. And the key to that is clear communication. That's what I think.
Good, thank you.
All right, so Roloff and John, do you have anything you want to add before we move on to the next topic? All right, thanks. So the next one is quality. It's great because when you develop a software or a project for the matter, depending on whether this is a prototype or a proof of concept or something that's already commercially in the real world, quality matters. And how much work you put in will basically define the quality of the product, right? If you've got a proof of concept, then obviously the amount of effort you put in isn't much because the objectives are a bit different. So understanding what type of product you're trying to develop, whether it be project or product or proof of concept or prototype, that helps you manage the amount of energy you put in. What you don't really want to do is you don't want to over-engineer your product by spending too much energy in that particular development. So understanding what you're trying to build helps you navigate the amount of energy you need to put in to answer the question of what is enough and what's the definition of done. With that, of course, there's always pressures on your quality, right? You can't just build a software without funding, and you can't build something forever without selling something. So there's always going to be downward pressure on you, whether it's from a financial perspective or time perspective. And once again, that will basically affect, the question that you need to ask. How do I balance all of this in order to give me just the right amount of quality to produce a product in the non-ideal world, that is? All right, I'm going to pass over to Roloff next to answer some questions and comments, perhaps.
Yeah, quality-wise, the product manager's role here is to be clear on the expected outcomes of a specific piece of work. Is it a proof of concept? Is it a prototype? Is it a release? And also the balance between the expectations on speed versus quality. And when applicable and when we know it, also communicate the amount of time available for a specific piece of work. But what we really want you to know here is, as I said earlier, in this team we represent the business. So there is a delicate balance between customer needs, technology, business requirements, the process, and we work these things out to decide what it is that we're going to do next. Is this just a proof of concept, or is it an MVP, or are we going full stack now and make something that's really shiny? It's sometimes hard to balance all these things and get to that answer. And yeah, that's what we do, and that's where it comes from. What do you think, John?
Absolutely. So from a quality point of view, the Scrum Master is really interested in knowing, are we looking at it in a robust way? So do we know, as we mentioned a bit earlier, do we know when we got there, for example? Have we got the right ceremonies in place? Have we got the backlog defined? Have we got the products understood? The sprint, the definitions are done. Are the ceremonies in place? Are the metrics collected? Also looking at from an imperatives point of view, quality is one could say that perfection is the enemy of progress. So if you look and you say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to go through this thing and we're going to look at the first bit and we're going to make sure it's perfect, and then we're going to move to the next thing and make sure it's perfect, you end up not being able to achieve what you need to in the time that's available. So a really important part of that, and something that the Scrum Master needs to understand from the product owner especially, and also for the developers, is how much quality is good enough quality. So where's that line between something that is an acceptable level that is going to allow you to have not spend more cost on that thing than you need to, so that you can be effective in the way in which the resources are being spent to achieve the end result. So it's saying, for example, it might be okay to have for the next release, it might be at the end of October or the end of November, to say we're going to have something that's not going to meet the end goal, but it does some basic part of it that's going to be enough for that particular, what the customers need at that particular point. And understanding what that difference is really critical, because if you can put something small in place early on, it means that you can get your early value coming back from that being implemented, so that you can validate whether you're on the right track. But also you might find that you don't need to have your perception of the quality of the end result might change as you go along, and say, well, we don't really need those kiosks, or we don't really need that great projector thing, that VR component that we thought was absolutely essential to what we were doing. So what the Scrum Master needs to understand from the others is what is the approach to doing that? So for example, are we taking a breadth first approach to say that we're going to build an end-to-end thin slice through everything, the basic process, and then elaborate on that? Or are we going to be building one particular component fully and then putting it in place? So having those things understood initially in the team agreement means that we can all work together of the same mind. So those are my thoughts from a quality point of view. So I will hand over to Rudolf.
Right. So in this process of I'm sorry, I just got a bit sidetracked there. In this process of deciding what needs to be developed next, one of the things that product managers need to consider is ROI, or return on investment. In other words, this means we need to have a good idea what the investment in a particular feature or product will be. In other words, we kind of need to know how long that piece of string is. It's a difficult one, but as product managers, and we need to keep in mind, this is what product managers want developers to know, but I want product managers to be considerate of this as well. Remember this, it's important. We live with uncertainty and best guesses. We don't need to know what the exact estimate for a specific thing is. Developers, give us what you've got. Make your best guess and pass it on, and we'll work with that. And if you've got an update, let us know. And for the same reason, we're also involved in continually updating the guesstimates for the remaining work, so that we can work out what is the investment. Is it still, are we on track? Are we doing well with where we should be going? Yeah, that's good. What do you want to hear there, Rich? What do you want to say there?
Thanks, Roloff, and thanks, John. All right, estimation. This is kind of like a game, isn't it? Guesstimation. How many people here have fun with estimation versus dreaming of the vision or jumping straight to the code or crafting the next best car in the market? I certainly don't have fun with estimation. But as a dev manager, I understand that estimating is important because it helps the business predict outcomes, plan for the future, budget, put more team members into your team so that you're not needing to do too many things yourself. But as a team member, it's a really tough question because you're often expected to provide accurate estimates, right? Your PLs or your Scrum Masters come to you and go, oh, what's this 3 months? Can't I just have it in 2 months? Like, have you not spent enough time planning the features that you're giving such a big estimate because it's going to cost a lot of money? And the dev team basically goes, well, we've actually understood that this is the complexity of the software and we think that's the estimate for the project. That's never a fun thing, right? You get better over time with it though. If you keep working on the same type of projects with information, the guesstimate becomes an educated guess, which is a lot better than just a blind guesstimate. So unfortunately, it's a game that we play all the time. And you know what? We use poker games, we use blind fingers counting, we use story points, and it's all in the spirit of trying to make this fun for the dev team. So guys, understand that when your POs or your Scrum Masters ask you for your estimate, it's because they need that from the business perspective to do all the non-fun stuff to make sure that we get to do the fun stuff.
Thanks, Richard. So from an estimation point of view, the Scrum Masters are in a bit of a quandary. So there's a myth that's out there that says that Agile projects are really bad at estimating. And whilst to a certain extent that's true, one needs to actually unpack what estimating is to a certain extent. Estimating is when you have a look and you say, I want to do X, and how long is it going to take? How many resources do I need? When is how much money do I need to put into this thing? And in a sense, a lot of traditional projects will look and say, well, I'm going to spend some time defining what it is that I want, and then I'm going to measure the success based on the extent to which I've achieved that thing. So it's a little bit like somebody taking a bow and arrow and then shooting the arrow, and then seeing whether the arrow went where you expected it to go. Whereas an agile approach is more like a guided missile. So you're constantly changing direction in order to really hone in on where the target is if the target is moving. So what that means is that you say, well, compared to where you originally thought the target would be, yes, you might be in a different place, but you've taken advantage of opportunities that have come up along the way, and you've also adjusted to impediments that might have impacted you. So in a sense, the real focus is to look at having a lightweight change process, which means not going to define everything up front right at the beginning, looking at things like understanding what your directional decisions are. That's something that I learned from one of my influencers, Tony Ponton. So really interesting topic, which we can go in future sessions. Having transparency of delivery to say, how do we know how far we are? We're not going through having a situation where we've achieved maybe part of we've had what Eric Ries calls vanity metrics, where we go and measure particular things as we go, but we find that when we get near the end, it's nothing compared to what we were expecting to get in terms of the response from the users. So the only way to really understand that is to put something valuable and useful in front of people. They make use of it, they provide feedback, and then you apply that feedback to the next iteration, and that's how your missile is able to change direction to achieve its target. And also, that allows you to have the early detection of the issues. So what the Scrum Master needs to know from the other two roles, specifically on this, is to look at things like, what is the approach that we're looking at? So how do we deal with things like directional decisions? How do we deal with being able to make sure that our change process is lightweight? So when you look at, is the executive willing to accept a lightweight process and say that, yes, we know that this isn't going to be the same as what we've got, but we don't need to have 6 layers of management to change direction for small things. That you have guardrails which are reasonably broad. And how are you maintaining those estimates? So as you change direction, you need to still be able to go back and say, yes, I can say that this is still a green project. This is something that is still going to be able to achieve things that is going to be valuable. Or alternatively, no, we need some external assistance to help us to get onto track, or we need to change scope, or we need to do some bigger thing to achieve that. And looking at then building the metrics coming out of the experience of, say, the last few sprints, for example, how does this influence what it means for the future? So, for example, if you've had, say, 3 sprints and you are, each of them you're able to deliver the stories in 2/3 of the time that it was you were expected, that means that you can take on more scope. You expect to have an earlier delivery. And similarly, the converse is true as well. So it's about collecting enough metrics to be able to have effective estimation going forward. So those are the things that the Scrum Master needs from the others, is how to implement those metrics, how we collect them, and how they can be useful to the product manager to make those key decisions. So that's my take on the estimation. I will hand over to Rudolf. I think the next topic is technical debt. I think to Rich, sorry.
Oh, it's back to me. Technical debt, good old friend. So as a software developer, since my early days as a junior, technical debt has been around. It's an old friend that never goes away, right? We all know what technical debt is. But I wonder if product owners and businesses understand the difference between defect and technical debt. Defect and technical debt both exist in all development cycles. Defect is when your software doesn't meet functional or non-functional requirements. Technical debt is a consequence of the actions you take in order to deliver the product at certain constraints, be it time, be it cost, be it the fact that you're new to a certain technology stack and you're not familiar, so you haven't applied the best practice for that. So we introduce a bit of technical debt. And over time, it slows the process of development. It introduces problems in expanding the software and architecture. And we then need to address it. So, there are 3 ways that I think technical debt comes in. The first one is the best one, which is you plan the technical debt. You understand the constraints of your project, and you make the active decision to introduce technical debt to balance the needs of the business and delivering the software. The second one is accidental technical debt, right? You knew that you need to avoid this, and you were trying to, but you accidentally introduced it anyway. Or you had a big team of 10 developers, a little slight communication problem and a bit of technical debt in there because 2 different competing design patterns were introduced, or 2 incompatible tech stacks or products were introduced. I need to squish a bit of the code here and there to introduce what works for the business. So that's accidental technical debt. Now the last one is the worst one. That is technical debt that you did not know you introduced. So this is when the dev team and the product team doesn't communicate, and then you didn't know about technical debt that you could have foreseen if you had a bit of discussion with your team members, and you've accidentally introduced it. Now the software released to the market, and you go, whoops, there's a big problem here. How do we fix this? And that's a very costly technical debt because you didn't plan for it, and therefore you now need to take time off your dev cycles to address this. And that's basically when the business needs to play ball with us in order to help us solve the problem together. You know, can we get some time to address these technical debts? Do we release a new feature versus fix some bugs, or can we change the platform to a more robust platform before we add more features? What's the health of the product and the health of the business? How do we balance the difference between those two? So I hope that perhaps Roloff and John can shine some light into this.
Yeah. As product managers know everything about technical debt. And that's mostly because developers keep telling us about it. I think what I'm trying to say there is we don't understand it. Very few product managers actually have a technical background. We hear you guys talking about it, but yeah, so. And now we want to move forward. Product managers want to move forward. We want to get to the next thing. We want to refine what we have. And the developers want to go back to pay off that technical debt. So keeping in mind that we don't really understand this, what we need from you guys is to help us to quantify it in terms that we do understand. Ideally, first price, what I would really love to see is what will it cost the business to pay off this technical debt? What will it cost the business to ignore this technical debt? And what's the likelihood of us having to actually pay that for that technical debt problem to come to realization? If we have all that information, then we can actually come up with a plan and help you guys to schedule and plan and for the if and when and how we are going to pay back the debt. What's the Scrum Master's view on that?
Thanks, Roloff. So who knows what technical debt is actually? Okay, got a couple of hands up. So, and the word debt is quite important because you're paying back something. When you take out a loan from the bank, then you incur a debt, right? So in the same way, when you're in the middle of a development cycle, you are saying, well, we're going to do some shortcut thing now because then that's not going to allow us to meet the end objective, but it allows us to meet a short-term objective. So it's saying we can finish the screen, we can have people go in, they can see the report, but in order to run that report, we need an army of 100 people behind the scenes going and churning out the figures. It's maybe a sort of a Zapier to an air tasker that goes and does the thing and then comes back. So, in a sense, technical debt then is something that means that unless you pay it back, you can't get the overall result that you need. Either because it doesn't work, the big end goal, or alternatively it costs too much operationally to run. So understanding what it is as you go through is really a decision for the product manager to make a decision on. And what the Scrum Master is interested in doing from a developer, from a product manager point of view, is making sure that the product manager has enough information to be able to make decisions on those. Or alternatively have some agreement with the team to say that we accept maybe X% of the development work is going to be applied to refactoring code that you might have had before, making the solution more robust so that the architecture that you've got is able to be sufficiently scalable. It is able to cover enough of your architectural or security issues that you might have. So one of the key things that the Scrum Master is interested in saying, how do you measure it? To say, how many compromises have we made and how much work do we need to do on work that has already been finished so that we can bring it up to the standard that is required to meet the end objective. So measuring it becomes quite important because you've got a whole lot of technical debt and you don't realize how much it is. You could think that you are really close to having a finished product, but you could be miles away. So from a process metrics point of view, being able to quantify that becomes important. And part of the team agreement is to agree on how you measure and quantify it. The second thing is looking at the future risks associated with technical debt. You might say that, yes, it's we're going through this Heath Robinson sticky tape and rubber bands and everything to get it together, but that might also mean that the product is perhaps a little bit brittle. And does that mean to say that there might be use cases that you're not aware of, where in a particular context that when you try and make use of that thing, that it just ends up not working at the end of the day. So understanding what that risk is means that from a product management point of view, and even in some cases from an executive point of view, that the organization can make decisions to say, yes, we're willing to accept that risk because it's unlikely that that particular scenario is going to be coming out. Therefore, we can move forward on that one in the meantime, but we'll build it in as technical debt going forward. So we're not going to scale up to 100 million users. We're going to keep it to just maybe the 1,000 pilot group. That's how we're going to address the technical debt. Okay, so I will hand over to Rudolf. Unless you have anything further on technical debt that you wanted to talk about.
No, I'm good. Let's go for the next one. Continuous realignment to achieve better market fit. So in our first topic, we talked about sharing the product vision. Now, imagine you're at work, not here. The product vision was shared. We started designing and building the product. We had a proof of concept, an MVP, maybe even a few more refined releases. And now we start talking about realignment. And I can almost literally see how the developers roll their eyes and say something about, I know that's going to happen. So what happened? Well, several things. The first probability is, as product managers, we're still confident in our product vision, but something went wrong in the implementation. We just didn't get it right. Another possibility is we're responding to change. Imagine, for example, you release a new feature that involves AI, and you do that sometime in the first half of this year at more or less the same time when ChatGPT became prominent. Overnight, your new feature becomes redundant. The other possibility is we just got it wrong. So, what do? We placed a bet. We tested our solution in the market. We got negative feedback. Now we adapt. We're not going to sit on this solution that's dead in the water. We need to do something about it. We need to pivot. We need to work out what can we do to stick to this product vision or abandon it. And if we do stick to it, what do we need to do to provide value to the business and satisfy customer needs? In other words, we're responding to change through experimentation and adjustment. We're applying our agile mindset. This is something that happens. It's a reality of product management. And, well, basically, we just want the developers to know that this is what happens. It's not like we're trying to screw anybody around. The reality of the world is we sometimes need to realign for a better market fit.
Thanks, Rudolf. So I think to a certain extent, as Rudolf was alluding to, is that almost all projects get it wrong. And I put it wrong in inverted commas because it could be that the market's changed. It could be that not necessarily because anyone did anything specifically wrong, but it's because at the beginning of the project you don't really understand all of the things that you need to do. You don't know what's important, what's not important. You discover that on the journey. And the key is being able to change direction quickly to be able to take advantage of opportunities that come up, or alternatively, to be able to overcome impediments. And you can't do that unless you have a robust vehicle that's able to make those changes. So a lot of these structural things that are spoken about in the initial team agreement meeting is saying, how do we set ourselves up in such a way that when those impediments inevitably come along, are we able to quickly change direction? Now, from a traditional point of view, the way of addressing risk is often to go and say, well, we need to explore the problem space in as much detail as we can. We'll spend months going through really understanding every aspect of it and then taking a step forward. And whilst that can be applicable for some situations where you don't have changing stakeholders, you don't have changing requirements, you don't have changing landscape, that can become a chain that can be around one's neck. Because what can happen is that you find that when you do need to make a change, all of a sudden you've got thousands of decisions that you need to go and revisit because now that's a different direction that you're going in. So the key to directional decisions is being able to separate out those decisions that you need to make now because they determine the course of the river, as opposed to those things which can be made later. Defer the other ones as much as possible, because that gives you the ability to adapt quickly to changes as they happen. The cost of change becomes much less. So another key thing around being able to be continuously realigned is the other point that I mentioned a little bit earlier, which is to try and put things in front of end users that they can use in anger. And I'd recommend a really good book by David Bland called Testing Business Ideas, where he talks about very lightweight very lightweight experiments that you can do to validate hypothesis. And that allows you then to be able to estimate more effectively as you had before, but also to understand the market that you're dealing with. Are people of this particular demographic going to buy this type of shoes on a Wednesday? And then you can do something small that can validate that. And if that's the case, you know that there's a market there, you can start expanding in that particular area. So another aspect is to use the concept of spikes. I don't know if you are familiar with spikes as being areas where you would take it's like a dipstick, where you go and you say, well, for example, if no one in the team has done a SAP integration before, you can say, well, we don't know how big it's going to be, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to maybe have a really simple, bare bones, one field integration with SAP that's going to take a few days to do, but it's going to inform us as to how big that amount of effort is that's going to be to do that. And in so doing, it also allows us to understand how we can live it easily. So that's how you build a vehicle that can change direction quickly. And another key aspect around continuous realignment is to go back and reflect regularly. How are we doing from a process point of view? How are we collaborating with each other? What are the things that we see as a team that we can improve on? And when you look at Scrum projects, often the retrospective is the thing that people end up not going to, because they say, well, no, we haven't got time for that. It's not that important. And often that's an indicator to say maybe the team hasn't got enough autonomy. Remember I spoke earlier of Dan Pink's drive book around autonomy, mastery and purpose, is that the team hasn't got the power to be able to change the way in which they do things. Then they're not going to be able to attend, or they're not going to be keen on attending retrospectives, because it just becomes a talk fest. But if applied correctly, and you can say, can we make real change to the way in which we collaborate, then you can increase the productivity of the team exponentially. There's a really good book by called Atomic Habits. I'm not sure who the author is, but saying if you do things regularly with a regular cadence and you improve just 1% each time, then exponentially that increases over time to have a massive impact on the overall delivery. I think Einstein was saying that the compound interest is a force of nature, and you can certainly see that when it comes to continuous improvement of teams if they are committed to doing things just a little bit better each time they go and have a reflection. And one last thing I'll leave you on with that one before I pass over to Rich is one of there's a couple of I'll call them mindset-oriented frameworks that are quite new in Agile, and I say new over the last few years. One of them is The Heart of Agile by Alistair Coburn, who's one of the founders of the Agile movement. And he talks about saying that if you do these 4 things, whenever you look at doing an action, ask yourself, are you collaborating with this action? Are you delivering something? Are you reflecting? Or are you improving? And if you just do that every day, nothing else, you will naturally, and you and your team will naturally improve and become more and more effective in what you do over time. And it's using that compound interest effect to achieve that. Rich.
Thanks a lot, guys. So Roloff, you helped us understand a bit of an introduction to what continuous alignment is. And John, you've spoke about the mechanics that allow us to adapt in continuous alignment. So I want to talk about the developer's mindset on continuous alignment here. How many of you, when you've released the product, get anxious of what the potential feedback would be from your would-be customers? Is it going to be a great product? Am I going to get a very backlash of the product? Heaps of bugs? Is it going to crash and fail? So we think about all these things as developers, and we have to be able to pivot. Pivoting is kind of like mint being the best friend of lamb. Pivot is the best friend of continuous alignment, right? We have our retros, we speak about what worked and what did not, and we learn from that. And we pivot. We make choices, we pivot, we keep our processes light and agile. I know that's a kind of oxymoron using agile, but keep your processes light, keep it agile, so that you've got the space to maneuver and make changes necessary to adapt. You also spoke, John, about what if there is no empowerment to the team, and then what's the point of attending these retrospects? Are they just ceremonies? Well, guys, if you're in a position where you're not being empowered, then you need to reach out to your product owners, your project managers, your business owners, and help them understand the importance of these processes. They're not just a show, they're not just a talk fest. We as developers, we need the space and the time to be able to assess what has worked, what has not, use our creative brains and juices, and come up with new ideas that work. That's the whole spirit of being agile, in my opinion, as a developer, is being able to accept change, recognize it, and then try these different changes. And if you can't do that, then you're not being agile, and you're bound to fail in development of any sort of projects out there, be it big or small. That's my key take on continuous alignment.
Right, thank you. I'm going to end this topic now and end the discussion with a closing thought. I never lose. I win or I learn. Anybody here know who said that?
You did. There's an essay there.
Sorry?
There's an essay something in the song.
It was Nelson Mandela. Now he was talking politics, I'm talking product development. But it's the same. I never lose. I win or I learn. That's at the essence of what we're doing here. Not just in realignment for better market fit, not just in product development, but also in how we as a team learn to work better together. Let's learn from it. Let's do that together. Right, that concludes our discussion. We're now going over to Q&A. Okay, we do have a few questions, and at this point I need my glasses. It's in order of popularity, so I'll go top down. Is there any equivalent to a Scrum Master if your company uses a different methodology like Shape-Up? Scrum Master?
Is that what Scrum Master, sorry. Is there an equivalent to a Scrum Master if your company uses a different methodology like Shape-Up? So that was an anonymous question. I'm not familiar with Shape-Up methodology. Can someone describe what Shape-Up is to me? Put your hand up.
6-week test cycles, cool down.
Yep.
That's the main concept.
So 6-week cycles and
And then 2-week cool down.
2-week cooldown. Okay, so it's about an 8-week cycle. Okay, so that's the main difference. I think the one thing from a Scrum Master point of view is that the Scrum does favour shorter cycles, and the reason for that is that you're able to change direction more quickly. So if you think of the analogy of the arrow and the missile that I spoke about a bit earlier, is that if you had a guided missile that only did a check of where the enemy target is every 30 seconds, you can imagine that they could probably be a little bit less effective at being able to zero in on what that target is than one that is able to change its direction every second. So the frequency with which one is able to realign has a big impact on that. The second thing that has an impact resulting from timeframes is if you have a team that is going through and working towards a short-term goal. So that when you have something that's 2 weeks ahead, you can basically keep everything in your mind. If you have a period that extends beyond that, then you start forgetting things, which means that it becomes more important to write things down. And that's where the spec becomes more important in the conversation. So if you have a short time span, it means that what you're able to do is to say, well, based on these conversations, I've built something, and then you use the thing that you built as the validation for whether you're on the right track or not. If you have a long period of time, it means that you need to have more emphasis on saying, have we written down everything that we thought was important to do, and then do what the spec says. So it's a different approach that becomes necessary with a longer time span. Now, having said that, there are a lot of processes and procedures that you need to implement for short time spans that introduce extra work. So, for example, if you need to do a lot of regression testing, if you have to do that every 2 weeks, it can result in a lot more effort than if you only have to do it once every 6 weeks. And that's why some companies choose to do the longer time span, because of the fact that you only need to do those things that are targeted on the end of the increment once, instead of doing them every 2 weeks. So it reduces the amount of effort required to do those things. So no particular approach is a one shoe fits all. It's about really understanding the environment that you're in and then picking the right tools to suit that environment. And Shape Up would be applicable to environments, I believe, that require the latter part. Does that make sense?
Well, I think the question is more like, if you're not using Scrum, do you need a Scrum Master? Or what would you do if your company moved away from Scrum, if you had Scrum Masters?
Well, the role of Scrum Master and by extension also Project Manager and Agile Coach and all those sorts of things, they fill a particular need within that triumvirate. So the people that build things, the people that define what it is that you're going to build, and the people that facilitate the process. So they have different hats. So each of those would need to have those roles filled by something. It doesn't have to be called a Scrum Master, but if you're going to be running a process, then somebody's got to be responsible for process hygiene and making sure the executives are aware of how well it's going and all that sort of thing. I'm sure within Shape Up and with other ones you have a name for somebody that does that governance bit.
It's just prime manager, business, sponsor.
Yeah. So the sponsor might be involved directly with those sort of things, maybe in that context. But somebody would do it, whether it's under that role or subsumed as part of what other people do. The process needs to be run by somebody. Do you want to go on to the next question?
Yeah, let's go to the next one. What is the difference between product manager and product owner, and do we need both? I'll give you my take. A product owner is a Scrum role. A product manager is a career. It could be the same person and do both. You've got something else to add, guys?
Well, thanks. Makes it easier. As a developer, I don't actually care whether we have a Scrum Master or a product owner or product manager. I just need someone that can tell me, if we're on track with time, someone that can help me understand the product that I'm building, someone to be my voice if I need to communicate to the business or the customers as a developer if there's a particular impediment and needs to be resolved. So from an Agile perspective, from a Scrum perspective, of course you have these titles for these roles, but if you look at development as a broader piece of picture, it's just a name for another role for someone to look after that side of development for you, right? As long as you have that voice in the company, then you can call it whatever you want. As a developer, I'm in a happy place that I know there's someone to look after me from that perspective. It is, however, difficult if these roles aren't present, and then the developer is left to fight the battles of not just deciding on the technical challenges, but also from a time management perspective, and also needing to communicate expectations back to the board or the business. So, just having that someone to manage the role for us takes a huge burden off our shoulders as developers and allow us to focus on what we need to do in our roles.
I probably want to add one thing to that as well, is in that separation of church and state. If one looks at the reason why the democracies have worked a lot better than the old monarchies in the past, is where you have a concentration of power in one individual or one group, then it means that you don't have the separate legislature, executive and judiciary. Means that you don't have that control over people's what they do on a daily basis to the extent that they lose that autonomy. So in order for people to feel that they have autonomy, you need to separate out those powers, because the concentration of that means you very quickly end up with people saying, well, what is it that I need to do today? Go to their manager, and the manager gives them work, and then they come back, and their whole role becomes about doing what the manager asks, as opposed to being part of that process to independently and autonomously deliver something of value. So that's one reason why separating out those can have value.
Next question. Man, this is a thorny one. How did you handle your worst misunderstanding or conflict between a product manager and developers? I think for me, the first thing there is to realize that there is a misunderstanding, and to do that pretty quick. You don't want to realize that there's something wrong when you're like 6 sprints into a development. You've got to work that out very soon. And how do you do that? By being involved through communication. The product manager or product owner or whoever that person is with that hat on need to be involved in the process with the developers. Attend the stand-ups. Talk with each other. Listen to what's going on, make decisions. And then continuing from that, once you've worked out that there is a misunderstanding or brewing conflict, solve it through communication. What I find with any kind of conflict is it's because there's a difference between two people's idea of what needs to be done. One person don't want to do that additional thing for whatever reason, or they think that something else should be done. One of those 3 reasons. Work out what it is and address it.
Thanks, Roloff. When I was thinking how to respond to that, I initially thought of continuous alignment, and I thought about things like show and tell, demo sessions, end of sprints. But there's something actually much more simpler than that, and that's to have an open door policy. If you want to avoid miscommunication and you want to continuously realign, then both sides, whether you're product owner, developer, you need to have an open door policy, right? You need to be able to allow someone to reach you, to ask you questions, to debate, agree to disagree. And as developers, yes, we spend hours and days and weeks on a piece of code, we're passionate about a piece of technology, but if that's not the right fit, then you have to recognize it, and you need to learn to let go in order to pivot to what is right for the project or product. So the key is you need to be someone who's accessible within the team. You need to be a team player. That's the only way you're going to be able to continuously align to that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It comes down to the heart of doing Agile versus being Agile. So part of that is to say that having the mindset of collaboration means that you are all in the same boat together, that you're going to have as much engagement as you need to be able to make sure that what comes out at the end of each sprint, for example, is going to match what it is that you needed to come out of that. Which means from a product manager point of view, being available. It means from a developer point of view, making the things that you produce available to the product manager in a way that they can look at it, they can play with it, they can say, yes, this makes sense to me, or no, move that button perhaps a little bit to the right. And have a short feedback cycle between discovering the thing and going and implementing it. And when you become super productive, it means you can even have the product manager co-designing some of the stuff. Maybe with your UI designers, this touching on the UI element a little bit as well, is that you can co-design things to a certain extent on the fly as it's happening, rather than going through a specification process and then building to the spec and then resolving the defect. But doing it by looking over someone's shoulder and saying, move that thing around, yes, that looks more or less right, I can change that thing. And then it's done. It can be a lot more effective when you get things done in a fraction of the time, if you have that culture that allows you to produce things quickly. So I think it's a really good question.
I also want to add that for those of us who are fortunate enough to have roles like a UX designer or a technical writer or any specialist in your team, learn to rely on them, learn to lean on them for their professional and technical knowledge and advice, because that will help you navigate through any discrepancies you have, any friction in disagreements. You know, for example, if the dev and the PO can't agree on the same feature, well, lean on a UX designer, because they have the knowledge for the best practice out there on what works for a person, right? If you're designing an app for, say, someone with disability or someone who's on site wearing big gloves and driving a big truck, you're not going to have a tiny little screen with tiny little buttons, or screens with very dull gray buttons. You need something high contrast, something big for press. So the UX person understands this, and the developer might not, because the developer might go like, oh, well, I can cram 10 buttons in the screen, why I just have one, right? And the PO might agree too, or the PO might disagree and go, what are these ugly colors? I don't need like red and blue, I just need like shade of grays. But that's where you lean on your experts in your team to help you understand where the best alignment comes in and help you navigate through those conflicts and those disagreements. It's not always between two parties. There can be a third party to come in and help you guys mediate through things.
So we probably have time for one more question, do we?
Yeah, we're technically over time, but let's do the last one. What do you think are the best ways a business should communicate agile and ways of working change to encourage adoption? I think that's a very good question for the agile coach.
So wait, hang on, so that's quite a complex one. Let me just have a look at the question again. Okay, so what do you think are the best ways a business should communicate agile and ways of working to change and encourage adoption? That is a good question, because it comes down to the whole concept of change management. And with any change management, if you're going to change anyone's mind, then you need to go through a particular process. And I think ProSci's got a good approach. I'm talking traditional language now, is to say that understanding what the burning platform is. To say if you just carry on the way that you're going at the moment, then what will the result be for the organization? Are you going to still be competitive? Are you still going to be able to deliver the change direction at the pace that's required, with the world changing a lot quicker now than it used to before? I mean, how many people were halfway through a project when ChatGPT suddenly came onto the scene, and you suddenly realized that half of what you were doing is no longer relevant? And that is going to accelerate when you find out it's not just ChatGPT coming out, but now it's coming, you are able to connect it up, and it's becoming more focused on specific business cases, which means that it's becoming increasingly important to be able to change direction quickly as you go and have a vehicle that allows you to do that. So the first thing is to make sure that you communicate the need for the change. Make sure that becomes well established. The next thing is to be able to identify your early adopters, so people that are enthusiastic about that, and build a community of practice around that excitement for the change, of things of what the world could look like if we had to go ahead and we had to implement some exciting new change on the environment. And once you build up that excitement, especially if you have representatives from across your organization, then work out an action plan for each of them to go and work with their local communities to be able to then build that out. The next point is to identify your low-hanging fruit, is to say what are the key things that you can do now that is going to be able to demonstrate success by doing something that's inherently valuable but doesn't cost us, it's the least cost thing to do. And then you go and you implement that one thing and then communicate that success to the group to say, look, we've identified this low-hanging fruit, we built the thing, and now it's had this massive impact on the result. Here's the before and after situation. And then that makes it easier then to start implementing the next change. Make sure that you embed each of those individual changes as you move through. So once you've got that, you end up with a set of a certain momentum that starts picking up. And then you have this groundswell. And then when you get to a stage where most of the organization is already behind the change, then it becomes a case of looking at the individuals who maybe are late adopters that are only going to come in when everyone else is already on board. and then it's about winning them over. Because what happens at that stage is that the organizational mindset switches to, oh, there's this new thing, to, oh, no, this is how we do things around here. And once you have that mental switch from that, you know that you've achieved success in the change. And a change from a traditional approach, which might be having a fixed mindset oriented, to a growth mindset oriented agile approach, is no different from any of those other changes. It follows the same process of being able to embed that in the organization. So that's how I would address that. Does that answer the question? But it might have been anonymous as well. Okay, cool. So I will hand back to Rudolf. Richard, unless you have anything.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to offer a slightly different view on change and adopting change. So when businesses hire new team members, we consider various aspects: what the personality of the person is, what their technical skills is, what kind of background they come in, how do they fit, would they be a good fit for the team, right? So that informs us that the team is not a single entity. It is a very dynamic composition depending on who's part of your team. As such, the rate of adoption is different because different people, based on different personality profiles, have different susceptibility to change. Some people are very good at grabbing change because they see the shiny ball and they want to run with it. Some people are afraid of change, and you need to help them understand that. The best thing for a business to do is, when you're hiring, understand the composition of your team, because that helps you understand how you can communicate change for your team members and your organization. One thing I also want to add is, if you introduce change as one big chunk and one big step, you're going to get a lot of rejection from it, because people, regardless of how accepting they are of change, generally don't like change. So if you want to change, then introduce it incrementally and help build that change as part of the culture of your company. When it becomes a culture, it's a subconscious thing, then it's automatically inherent in your DNA, and it's not something forced upon. Because as a developer, as a person with various different companies, I know that if I was forced to do something, at the first opportunity of not doing it, I'll run away from it, right? And if I don't remember it, then I won't apply it. I won't even be able to translate that to the next person that comes after me. But if it's inherent in my culture, then it's something that you don't even have to think of. You just do it, right? It's like when you go to companies that go for mining or safety culture is a big thing. Well, how did they introduce safety culture? They didn't do it overnight. They literally incrementally introduced it to the organization, so they became part of the culture, so that the next person that comes after you, you can then help foster that change to the next person. Thanks.
Right, we have about 30 minutes left on our schedule. That is for networking, for finishing the beer, finishing the pizza. We will still be here to answer more questions or have a chat. If you want to catch up with anybody else here, now is the time. Thank you all for coming. It was great seeing everybody. Thank you and goodbye.